Hello, everyone. Welcome to Chapter 11. Chapter 11 looks at the speaker and the audience, the occasion, and the subject. This chapter will go over main principles of selecting a topic, designing your speech, analyzing your audience, and analyzing yourself so that you can be most effective at public speaking. This chapter will define what public speaking is and address issues of public speaking anxiety. We will explain how to approach public speaking systematically so you can break it up into chunks and not feel overwhelmed. We're also going to look at why we should conduct a self-analysis during our speech development process. And we're going to analyze our audience and learn how to tailor our speech to our audience. In addition, we're going to learn about the way that we can tailor our speech depending on the occasion where we have to give a speech. We want to learn to identify different criteria for effective topic selection. And we want to be able to narrow our topic down so that we can formulate an effective thesis statement that will guide our speech and give us a roadmap for where we're going. Public speaking is the process of preparing, staging, and delivering a presentation to an audience. For some of us, this class might be the first experience that we ever have with public speaking. However, the reality is that many of us have been in group kinds of situations or in family situations where there are many people listening to us, and we have delivered speech in those contexts. So for many of us, this is not our first instance of public speaking, but we are going to be learning all the details that go into designing and developing a professional public speech. A lot of times when people engage in public speaking, especially at the beginning, they tend to report that they feel anxiety about the process of public speaking. Public speaking anxiety is normal, and most people report that once they get some experience with public speaking, meaning that they do public speeches more than once or twice, then people report that their speech anxiety is reduced. So we can think about public speaking as something that is a skill set that we can learn more about, and we can tackle it systematically, step by step, so that we can be effective in choosing a good topic, effectively laying out our evidence to support our main claims, and effectively rehearsing the speech so that when the day comes to deliver the speech, we are standing in front of people and we appear that we are competent and proficient. It appears that we've done our research and we look like we are an expert on that topic. Now, in comparison to public speaking anxiety, communication apprehension is the fear of communicating no matter what the context. Some people tend to have more antisocial traits than others. This does not mean that you cannot learn to be an effective speaker in various situations. Some people get more nervous with interpersonal close conversations than with public speaking, and other people tend to get more nervous with public speaking, okay? So even if you have communication apprehension just in interpersonal situations, you can still learn how to be more effective by developing confidence in yourself and confidence in your ability to navigate the communication environment, no matter what it consists of. According to Figure 11.1, a survey by USA Today shows that adults dread giving a public speech more than cleaning their home, visiting the dentist, visiting the DMV, doing taxes, or waiting in line at the post office. What this shows is that a lot of people have apprehensions and hesitations about delivering public speeches, but what we know is that when you learn how to design an effective public speech and when you learn how to rehearse it, then when you present, you will be effectively trained and you will be able to come across as an expert and feel comfortable doing it. We also know that as people develop more experience with public speaking, they get more comfortable and they get more proficient. So it is a skill that that can be developed over time, and you can feel confident that you will be learning a lot of things in this course that will help you to be successful. One of the things that we can do to control our anxiety during public speaking is we can design and rehearse our presentations very carefully. When we design an effective outline, this allows us to lay out our main claims very specifically, as well as our supporting evidence. And because we have our specific claims and our supporting evidence laid out in our outline, then we have time to practice our outline or rehearse our presentation several times before we actually deliver it in front of people. Rehearsing your speech is an extremely important part of learning how to be an effective public speaker. When you rehearse your speech, you are able to commit to memory all of the information that you actually should remember by the time you stand up in front of the group of people. Do not ever expect to deliver a public speech that you have written out on note cards, or by reading your PowerPoint presentation, or by reading your speech from a paper. The worst thing you can do is get up in front of a room full of people and start to read a speech. Your audience members will immediately disengage. They will not be interested in what you're saying because you don't appear to be an expert, and you lose a lot of credibility when you start to try to read your speech. The exercise of extemporaneous speaking is learning to speak without the information in front of you. What this means is that we should be memorizing most, if not all, of the information that we are about to deliver, and then when the day of the presentation comes, we are only using key words on the PowerPoint slide or in an outline to jog our memory so that we can talk about the issue without having to read it. Delivering an effective public speech requires that we do not read note cards, papers, or PowerPoints. That is the biggest way to lose your audience and to lose credibility in front of your audience. Please do not read from note cards or PowerPoint slides when you are delivering any of the speeches in this class. If you cannot deliver your speech by memory, it shows that you did not rehearse, that you did not take the time to memorize it, and it shows that you're really not that prepared to be standing in front of people and delivering the speech. The other thing that we can do is recognize that sensations and thoughts of nervousness are normal and that it is a part of public speaking. One of the things that helped me a lot when I was beginning my public speaking career was learning to harness the feeling of nervousness or anxiety and to reframe it as a feeling of excitement. So rather than telling yourself how nervous you are before you go in front of a group of people, you can start to tell yourself how excited you are to share this information because you know that the information is going to be useful and helpful to the people that you're sharing it with. So it's important to realize that nervousness is actually a trait that will help us in our speech. Try to imagine going out in front of a group of people and being so relaxed that you make a lot of mistakes because you're not really on top of your game, right? So we can see how nervousness helps us to be prepared and to deliver the speech in an effective way. Another thing that we can do is deep muscle relaxation. This is where we start to relax our body, beginning from the top of our head, slowly checking in with every part of your body so that you can see, are your shoulders tense? Is your neck tense? And then you actively, mindfully work to relax that part of your body. Allowing ourselves to get into a relaxed state prior to public speaking will help us do a better job because we will be breathing better. We will be able to speak from our diaphragm, which is speaking from your belly rather than up in your throat. It's extremely important to be able to enunciate clearly and also to project effectively so that people can hear you. So we can work on tuning in with our body and work on standing in a way where we have good posture so that we can project out to the audience and so that we can use a clear speaking voice that sounds like we feel that we belong up in front of people, right? So getting mindful about our bodies and learning how to consciously relax our bodies will help us overcome the physical symptoms of speech anxiety. We can also use the very important strategy of thought stopping. This is where when we come into a thought or when we realize that we're having a thought that is anxiety producing, we deliberately act or tell ourselves mentally, stop. So for example, what that might look like for you is every time you have a thought such as, oh, I'm so scared to give this speech. I'm just afraid I'm going to get up in front of the audience and my technology is not going to work and I'm going to sound like a frog and my throat's going to croak and I'm just afraid it's not going to go well. You can say to yourself, stop. And instead of thinking that thought, you can deliberately choose to think a thought that will help you, such as, I'm very excited to share this information that I've worked really hard to learn and prepare about. I know that the people in the audience are going to be friendly and receptive to what I'm saying. I know that this is going to be a great exercise for me so that I can learn to be an effective public speaker, which I know is really going to help me in my career. So every time you find a negative thought happening, you tell yourself, stop. and then you replace it with a positive thought. You can also use this strategy with a lot of other types of communication situations in life. Another effective approach for helping us to learn how to be effective public speakers is to engage in visualization. Visualization is similar to the process of replacing negative thoughts that we discussed on the previous slide. And what visualization does is it allows us to imagine going in front of the room, or imagine going in front of the group of people that we are about to speak with, and we imagine going into that situation feeling confident, feeling excited to share the information that we have with them, feeling excited to be able to learn more about the topic ourselves as we engage an audience, feeling excited to be able to get more proficient at public speaking. And so we imagine ourselves walking in, looking forward to giving the public speech, and then we imagine ourselves delivering the public speech. We imagine ourselves feeling confident and feeling competent as we speak. We imagine the audience nodding and connecting with us. We imagine that the audience is listening and that they care and that they want to learn what we're about to teach them or share with them. So visualization has been used in a lot of different types of industries, and it has been found to be very effective in helping people to overcome their fears and being able to be more proficient at any kind of skill that you might imagine. So for example, with some of the professional athletes or even college athletes, a lot of times the coaches are trained to help the athletes visualize having a positive game. And they actually talk them through visualization exercises prior to playing their games or prior to going into a sports arena, because they know that when people are able to visualize something going well, then they're more likely to behave in ways that will help to promote that in terms of the outcome. There are other techniques that we can use to dispel or to decrease our anxiety as well. Some of these involve using humor early in the speech. Now, humor is something that we need to use very carefully, especially when we're speaking in a public forum. Humor is something that is very unique to the person. And so what you find funny, other people may not find funny. So if you are going to use a joke, my one word of caution would be make sure that it's a joke that is extremely politically correct so that you're not stigmatizing any group or any person. Make sure that you're using a joke that is not inappropriate for the context. And also, it's always better to use humor that is self-effacing, so you can make a joke about yourself instead of joking about somebody in your audience, right? On the other hand, you can joke about yourself, but you don't want to actually demean or put yourself down in front of people, because then they wonder, well, why is this person up here criticizing themselves in front of us? So humor is something I would say that you want to be very careful about using, but you can at least at the very beginning of your speech, you can smile and introduce yourself. You can look for those friendly faces in the audience. Making eye contact with the audience and finding those people that are engaged and listening to you and that want to be there and that look friendly is a very effective strategy in public speaking. In all of my years of public speaking experience, which has included thousands of lectures with students and also hundreds of public lectures at conferences and things like that, I have always used the look for a friendly face strategy. And it really does help, because if you're able to start to see that you're talking to individuals instead of just a huge group of people, then you can use that during your speech to help you feel more comfortable and to help you go along feeling that you're doing a good job, right? I would not encourage that you look for people that do not look like they want to be there. If you look out there and you find people that look bored or uninterested or even hostile to what you're saying, I would advise you to make minimal eye contact with those people and instead make more eye contact with the people in your audience who look like they want to be there and who look friendly. Another thing that we can do is you can use presentation aids. Presentation aids are also called visual support. So sometimes you might use charts or pictures or statistics, or in our course for the informative and for the persuasive speech, students are encouraged and expected to use a PowerPoint presentation. The PowerPoint presentation is something that is fairly common nowadays in professional environments. Most people know how to develop them, and they're really easy to learn how to make. So you don't have to feel like this is something that you can't learn, because once you figure out how to make PowerPoint presentations. They're really actually very simple, and they really add a lot to your speech. The first stage in designing an effective public speech deals with topic selection. Topic selection should revolve around something that you personally care about. This is because if we care about an issue or a topic, or if we have experience with that issue or topic, then we are more likely to do a better job at researching it and delivering it. And if we are excited about a topic, then that excitement will shine through during our speech, which in turn will make the audience more excited to hear what we have to say. Once we choose our topic, then we want to develop the speech in terms of our main outline, in terms of our main claims, and in terms of our supporting evidence or research. Every main claim that we make in a speech should involve supporting evidence. Your outline should be laid out first in a detailed format so that you can learn all the information that you need to memorize, and then you should lay out your outline by using the key words that you want to use to jog your memory so that when you are up in front of the audience, you can use just the keywords and you can talk extemporaneously about the issue, okay? You do not ever want to get in front of an audience and start reading note cards, start reading your PowerPoint presentation to them, or start reading from an outline. The worst thing you can do in terms of public speaking is to read from note cards or any kind of source. This is because it shows that you have not really prepared for the speech. It shows that you have not memorized the information that you actually should know because you are standing up in front of people as an expert, right? So as soon as you walk out in front of that group, people are going to assume that you are an expert on the topic. So what that means is you need to demonstrate that you're an expert by memorizing the material and only using keywords to jog your memory as you go through the speech. Once you get your outline and supporting evidence in place, then you need to practice your speech. On average, when I was doing public speaking professionally in terms of going to conferences and things like that and presenting research and papers, I would practice my speech at least 3, 4, or 5 times prior to getting in front of a room full of people and delivering the speech. In doing this, you're able to memorize your speech. You're also able to get more comfortable talking about it so you feel like an expert, and you're able to iron out any possible areas of difficulty prior to the actual day of the speech delivery. Once you're done giving your speech, then you can do a post-presentation analysis. So, how effective did you feel when you were delivering the speech? How did your audience respond to you in terms of whether they seemed like they were engaged or interested? Did the audience ask questions? Were there other things that went well in the speech that you wanted to make note of? What were some of the things that you felt that you could have done better? Did you feel that you handled the audience well? Were you able to get them to interact with you, or did you feel like you were just talking at them, right? The best public speakers are able to engage the audience as they deliver the information through the strategic use of good questions, right? Having people participate in some way by saying things like, by a show of hands, how many of us have experienced a fear of public speaking here? And then you get the audience to raise their hands, right? So the best public speakers are able to dialogue with their audience as they're doing the speech, even if there's not an actual dialogue of back and forth. You always want to think about your audience. You always want to be tuning into what they're experiencing. And if you start to feel like you're losing your audience, meaning that people start to tune out, or they start to look at you like they don't understand what you're saying, or they start to look extremely bored, then what that means is it's time to switch it up a little bit. Maybe it's time to use a different example. Maybe it's time to take a 2-minute break and just have people stand up and stretch. Maybe it's time to use a joke to help get people more engaged, right? These are all things that you can think about, but you can also do a post-presentation analysis on a speech by using more formal evaluation standards. So you could use like a rubric, and you could evaluate your speech that way. If you really want to see how effective you are at public speaking, you can videotape your speech, which in this course, you all will have to submit your speeches in that format. So I strongly encourage you to watch back your speeches, because when you watch yourself deliver the speech, it allows you to see what things you're doing well, what things you could improve upon. And in watching it yourself, you'll see things that you would never think of if you were just kind of, referring back in your own mind. So there's a lot of things in terms of nonverbal cues, how you're standing, other types of distracting things that you might be doing, which would inhibit your ability to be effective. And you would see that if you actually watched your speech back. So let's move on and get into more of the speech development in the next slide. So let's get a little more into this idea of topic selection. Obviously, I told you before that you should choose topics that are personally meaningful to you, that you care about, because you will be more interested and you will do a better job delivering the speech, and your audience will sense that you're excited about it and they will get excited as well. So we want to think about, obviously, what's important to us before we choose a topic, right? For some of us, we already know exactly what we want to give our speech about. For others, sometimes we have to do a little bit of analysis of ourselves, right? What are some of the things that we tend to spend our time doing in life? What are some of the types of causes that we are committed to, right? Are we committed to the environment? Are we committed to animal rights? Are we committed to helping people from disadvantaged backgrounds get ahead, right? You have to analyze yourself so you can choose a topic that you can get excited about. However, we also want to analyze our audience. So when you're choosing a topic, you want to think about what kind of a topic would be relevant to your audience and that they would care about enough to want to sit there and listen to you deliver your speech. So obviously you would not want to choose a topic that you could anticipate would be boring to your audience, or the audience would find to be irrelevant to their experience in life. You also want to identify the occasion. So in our outline at the beginning of the course, we have the syllabus, and the syllabus talks about the different types of speeches that you might find yourself in. So we can analyze whether we're giving a special occasion speech or a ceremonial speech. We can say, okay, that has a very specific type of structure that we want to use. If we're going to do a narrative, that's more of an informal speech where you're telling a story, right? So obviously that is more based on your experience versus evidence. However, if you move forward and go into the informative and the persuasive speech, these speeches require that you provide supporting research and statistics and evidence that will support every main claim, right? So obviously giving a scientifically based speech is going to be different than giving a narrative speech where you're just telling a story about a meaningful time in your life, right? And of course, delivering the speech will look different. However, it is important to always be able to identify the occasion of the speech. Now, for some of us, we may not be giving a formal speech at work, but we may have to be at a business meeting with 15 or 20 other people, and we may have to give a 5-minute overview of a certain project that people are working on. In that case, you would want to tailor your speech so that it is appropriate for that business meeting, rather than going through, a complete layout of, everything. You want to truncate the main points. You want to, get to the main point quickly because you may only get a few minutes, and you want to be very strategic and selective about the kinds of words and language that you use so that you can get your point across quickly. So once you've analyzed yourself and your audience and the occasion, then you can choose a general subject. So let's say generally you're interested in living a healthy lifestyle. This is something that's important to you. You engage in a lot of activities on a daily basis that help to promote living a healthy lifestyle, right? You're always trying to get your friends or your parents to go to the gym with you, okay? So this is a topic that would be a great general topic, and then you can get even more specific as you think it through, right? So if I know I want to talk about living a healthy lifestyle, then I could start doing some research about that general topic. And then as I'm doing that, I would probably be able to locate a more specific topic that would help me give a more effective public speech, because it wouldn't be so general. So for example, instead of just living a healthy lifestyle, I might decide I'm going to promote the importance of regular, consistent, and diverse exercise, okay? Because the research shows that people who are physically active on an almost daily basis tend to have much better short and long-term health outcomes than people that are sedentary, right? So we're going to talk about this more on future slides, but for now, let's just approach it systematically. And as you can see, when we break the speech down into little blocks, right? And when we break the process of developing a speech into different blocks, it becomes more accessible and more manageable. Organizing and researching our speech are extremely important. I was told by my public speaking teacher when I took the course in college that if you stand up in front of an audience and you are unprepared, meaning that you did not do your research and you haven't practiced your speech ahead of time, your audience will know it and they will never forgive you, okay? People value their time immensely, and there is nothing more frustrating than having someone stand in front of you and taking up your time when that person has not done the correct amount of research and preparation where they should actually be up there giving the speech, okay? So one of the most important things that you can do is to conduct effective research on the topic that you are going to speak about. Researching the topic includes gathering materials related to statistics, scientific evidence, narrative or anecdotal evidence, right? Trends, definitions, all the things that you need in order to inform your audience about the topic, okay? That is involved in the supporting materials, which should be based on your research. Part of supporting materials also includes visual aids or presentation aids. Presentation aids can take the form of pictures or audio clips or even like a video, or they might include different artifacts like clothing, or sometimes people do a demonstration speech and then they actually have the items up in front of the group that they're going to be using to demonstrate something. So you always want to have your visual aids figured out and you want to weave it into your speech because it helps for a more effective overall speech. Organizing your materials is also extremely important, and as I talked about on previous slides, we can organize our materials effectively through the use of an outline. An outline allows us to discuss the introduction and to lay out the main claims that will be in the body, and then to lay out the main ideas we want to touch on in the conclusion. We're going to talk about each of these more in the next several slides. Another important thing, which I talked about already on previous slides, is to practice delivering our speech several times before we actually do it in front of people. This is extremely important because it allows us to learn the information well enough that we can actually talk about it without having to read or look at the note cards. And it also allows us to get more comfortable delivering the speech. Another thing that we should do is we should anticipate the kinds of questions that people might ask us either during the presentation or afterwards. So this is where we might think about, well, what would be some typical questions that I might ask, right? So this is very important because sometimes people may ask you a question, and if you haven't thought about how you'll answer that, then you can be caught off guard, right? And so you really want to anticipate the kinds of questions people might address. You cannot always anticipate that, but you can at least be prepared for that. And you can say something like, oh, that's a very good question. Let's look at it from this perspective, and so maybe you may not have the exact answer that the person wants, but you can at least discuss the question by referring either back to your speech or referring back to some other questions that you had prepared for. Another thing to do if you absolutely cannot come up with an answer and you're totally stumped is what you do is you say to your audience member, that is an extremely good question, and I'm going to look that up for you, and I will send you an email later today and give you the information on that, okay? Now, if you say you're going to do that, you need to follow through and do it. Otherwise, you lose a lot of credibility. But I would not feel too nervous about people asking questions that you're not prepared for. You do the best you can, and if anyone ever asks you a question that you haven't prepared for, you can say something like, that's a very good question. I don't really have an answer for you right now based on the research, but I'd love to look into it and get back to you on that as soon as possible. This shows your audience that even if you haven't actually prepared for every single question that they might ask, it shows that you care about what they're asking and it shows that you're responsible enough to look up the information and to give it to them later. After you give your speech, you can also do a post-presentation analysis. And then this is where we talked about this on a previous slide. You can compare and contrast your expectations with how the speech would go, with how well you actually felt like you did. You can also look at how well your audience was engaged. You can also gauge audience interaction in terms of how many questions people asked, how many comments people made, how often people wanted to keep talking about the issue even after you were done giving your speech. So these are all things that are extremely important in terms of approaching public speaking in a systematic way. In terms of analyzing yourself, conducting a brief review internally of your own life could help you select a topic that is meaningful to you. So again, in this situation, we're going to be looking back on some of the most influential or profound experiences that we've had, what kinds of topics that included, and narrowing it down so that we can choose a topic that is meaningful to us and or that we have experience with. You can also consider where you're at in your life right now. What are some of the issues that you're currently dealing with? What are some of the issues that you've been facing that you've been able to properly or effectively overcome in life? What are some of the challenges that you see other people your age or in your situation facing? We can also look at the newspaper. We can also look at online news sources in addition to print, but it's always good to be up on current events so that we can demonstrate not only that we have personal experience with a topic, that we have done our research, but also that we are connected to general current events and what's happening in the world today. Also, we can use technology to bolster our presentation. So you can think about what kind of technology you're most comfortable with or not, and you can try to select technology to use that will help you do a good job but not take away or detract from your overall ability to reach your audience. So for example, some people that do develop a PowerPoint presentation like to weave in several different types of video clips or little types of, animation things and, all sorts of things like that. I would advise that it is better to err on the side of simplicity than to have a whole bunch of bells and whistles and then to have it either distract you from the actual speech or take away from what you're trying to say because it's such a distraction that all people want to do is look at your PowerPoint slide. Remember, at the end of the day, you are there to verbally convey a message to your audience. So you should always have the speech memorized, and the PowerPoint should only be used for key points that are used to jog your memory so that you can explain or describe that situation that is referenced in the outline or the key phrases that you've used on the PowerPoint. One of the things we want to do when we're public speaking is avoiding MIGLO. MIGLO is an acronym that your book has come up with to refer to audience members whose eyes might be glazing over, or you can see a picture on this slide of a gentleman who's actually sleeping during someone's public speech. Now, hopefully nobody will ever fall asleep during one of your speeches. And if they do, you might want to try to step it up a little bit in terms of energy level or getting the audience involved. But it's always good to do your research about the audience prior to developing or delivering a speech. So you can look at things like, what is the typical audience member's personal experience in life up until this point? What are some of the issues that they might find important or relevant? You can do research about the people that are going to be in your audience in terms of their demographic group and things like that, and what kinds of issues are relevant to them and what kinds of attitudes they have about certain issues. Knowing your audience and your audience attitudes prior to going into a public speech is very important in terms of being able to craft your speech in a way where you will address audience concerns and be effective. Some of the demographics that we can analyze in terms of our audiences would include things like age, or gender, or family orientation, or religion, or cultural background. We can also look at occupation, or what people do for a living. We can look at how much money people make, or how much educational level they have. All of these things can shape the beliefs and the attitudes that people have when they come into a public speech that you might deliver. It's important to know these things as you're developing your speech for delivery, because if you know the different general trends of your audience, then you can tailor your speech so that it's more effective. So, for example, if the general trend of people in your demographic group is that they tend to be younger with more fatalistic cultural perceptions, when we look at fatalistic attitudes with culture, there are some people who come from cultures where they believe that things that happen just happen because it's the will of God, or it's just the way things are meant to be. They don't feel like they maybe have a lot of choice or agency in how life plays out, right? You can also look at things like education level, right? And how that might shape a group of people, for example, that you are trying to convince to adopt healthier lifestyle choices. Now, if you happen to know that the people in your audience are not that educated and they tend to come from cultural backgrounds that tend to just assume that life happens the way it happens and you don't get much choice, or the audience is younger and they don't tend to know all the research that older people might know about healthy lifestyle choices, then what that means is that you want to craft your message at a more basic level so that people are able to understand and take away the key principles of what it would mean in terms of adopting healthier lifestyle choices. Now, in comparison, if you already are talking to a group of highly educated people who tend to be involved in athletics or something like that, then you could tailor your speech so that it's more specific to their actual activities on a day-to-day basis. So rather than just generally trying to get people to get active and to eat better, you might be tailoring your speech to get adults to adopt specific kinds of behaviors for a certain amount of time. So rather than just exercise and eat healthy, your emphasis might be on convincing people who already believe that exercise is important to adopt weight training exercises 2 to 3 times a week, yoga once or twice a week, and moderate to high aerobic activity 4 to 5 times a week. So in knowing the demographics of our audience, we can better tailor our speech so that it will be more effectively received and we will be more effective in general. We can also analyze our audience in terms of what they care about. So you can look at things like motivation. Is attendance required or is it optional? Now, obviously, if you're required to be somewhere for a class credit, then the people are going to be a little less involved than if people have actually chosen to show up to your speech at a predestined time and place, right? And it's completely voluntary. You can also look at the values of your audience. So going back to the previous slide had things like religion and culture and family orientation. Those are all group memberships that tend to shape the kinds of values that people have. Is your audience homogeneous or heterogeneous? These terms refer to an audience that is similar to one another. So a homogeneous audience would be an audience that is very similar to one another, okay? Or if it was heterogeneous, what that would mean is that you have multiple types of values among different people in your audience, okay? So these are all things that you want to be aware of prior to developing and delivering your speech. We can also look at things like level of agreement. This is especially important when you're engaging in a persuasive speech. If you know what the level of agreement of your audience is prior to giving the speech, then you can design and tailor your message so that you target the beliefs that they currently have, and hopefully, if you use effective research, you can build on pre-existing beliefs and help to add new cognitions and new attitudes based on those beliefs that already exist. This is also important if you're trying to change people's beliefs about an issue as well. We also want to know about things like how committed are people to this particular issue? Do they care about this issue? Is it something that's important in their day-to-day life? All of these things can definitely shape the way that an audience perceives and receives any kind of message that you may attempt to deliver. And so as a good public speaker, it's on us to always know our audience and to analyze them so that we can effectively develop and tailor our speech to be the most competent in delivering it. We also want to consider the occasion that we will be delivering the speech in. So, date and time. When is the speech going to be delivered? How long is the speech supposed to be? One thing that you always want to be mindful of is that you do not go over the allotted time that you have been given for a speech. This is because oftentimes with public events and things like that, where you might deliver a speech, people are on a fixed time schedule in terms of having multiple speakers or having a certain time that's been allocated for speaking, and then we have activities that need to be developed and things like that. So you really want to always be thinking of that and always be early to your public speech so that you have plenty of time to get any kind of technology in place. And if there's any kind of a glitch that could happen with anything, you want to give yourself enough time to resolve it so that you are absolutely ready to deliver your speech at the date and time when you are expected to. You also want to think about things like location and participants. Where is the speech going to be delivered? Who will be listening? If you're going to be delivering a speech in an open public area, such as in front of the UH library where there's lots of traffic and lots of potential noise, then you would probably want to consider using a microphone. Otherwise, people may not be able to hear you effectively. You also want to be able to anticipate any kinds of distractions that there might be. So if you're doing it in a public forum rather than a closed classroom, you can expect that there will be more distractions. So what that means is that you can prepare for those in terms of how you will handle any possible noise or possible audience members who are not being mindful that you're trying to give a public speech, and how you will handle that and move through your speech. Do not let a disruptive audience member derail you from your speech. Sometimes audience members are not as polite as we would like, but it's on us to always move through it, do the best we can, complete the speech, and then later on you can go back and analyze if there was something that you could have done more effectively. But in general, it's just best to move through things and continue on with your speech. Do not let something derail you just because you didn't expect that distraction would take place. If you say something that you don't want to say, or if you have to clear your throat or do something like that, you can always just say, "Excuse me," and then continue on. So now we're looking at the topic area that you all are thinking about choosing for your speeches. The first thing that we want to consider is whether the topic is worthwhile. Is this a topic that you yourself think is important enough to spend your life researching the issue, developing scientific claims that are backed up by research, and that you think in general is worth your time in terms of delivering the speech, and is it worth the audience's time in listening to the speech? The second thing you want to consider is whether your topic is appropriate. Sometimes we have to choose a speech topic, and we want to choose a topic that is meaningful to us, but we don't want to choose something that is so personal that we are going to be divulging information that really is not appropriate for that kinds of a situation. Is the topic interesting? Is this something that you yourself would want to listen to? If it is interesting, then carry on. If it's something that you yourself would not even really want to listen to, then chances are you should be developing a different topic. Lastly, but very importantly, you need to be able to find sufficient research material to support your main claims. Every main claim should be backed up with evidence. In general, if you make a main claim in a speech or in a class or even in an academic paper, you should always have some kind of research, scientific evidence, or academic support material that you can use as supporting evidence. This is extremely important, and in general, we do not want to make claims that are not supported by evidence. So anytime we make a claim that is not general knowledge, so general knowledge includes things like the sky is blue, right? We cannot see air, various things that people already understand generally, okay? But what I see oftentimes is that students will make claims in their speeches, and sometimes they won't support it with evidence or research, and this is extremely important. You can't just walk out into a group full of people and say that something is the way it is just because you say so. You need to support it with evidence, scientific material, and research so that you can bolster your claims with effective evidence. This is also important in terms of establishing your credibility, which will affect your overall effectiveness in terms of whether the audience believes what you're saying, whether they want to agree with you, and whether they will take something away of value from the speech. Once you decide whether your speech is a worthy topic, then you want to narrow the topic and clarify your purpose. Every speech should have a very clearly stated purpose statement and objectives for the speech, or a thesis statement. What this sounds like is something like the following. In what follows, I will be previewing several factors that go into developing and designing and delivering an effective public speech. I will also be providing scientific evidence to support my claims so that I can demonstrate to you that anybody is capable of being a good public speaker if they just put their mind to it and do the work. That would be a good example of a thesis statement, okay? And every speech should have a very clearly stated thesis statement, which you say at the introductory phase. The informative speech and the persuasive speech are expected to be laid out in a very scientific way. However, the narrative speech and the ceremonial speech are more informal. But even if you're giving an informal speech, such as a ceremonial speech or a narrative, you should still state the purpose at the beginning, even if the purpose is just to talk about a time in your life when you were able to clarify your purpose because you went on a life-changing trip across the world. As I said before, the purpose statement and the behavioral objectives are developed first, and then once you do that, you can formulate your thesis statement, which is a very clear roadmap for people about where you're going in the speech. When I was taking public speaking, I was told that at the beginning of your speech, you should tell people what you're going to talk about. During your speech, which is the body portion, you tell them what it is you want to tell them. And then in the conclusion part of your speech, you tell people what you told them, okay? So in doing this, what you're doing is you're emphasizing the key areas at the beginning, you're discussing the key areas in detail, and you're reviewing the key areas that you talked about at the end of the speech. One of the reasons that we do this is that people tend to remember the first thing that you tell them, and they also tend to remember the last thing that you tell them. And so this is why it's extremely important to craft and design your speech in a way where you are emphasizing the main points at the beginning, during the speech, and again, touching on what you talked about at the end of the speech. In doing this, you will increase the likelihood that your audience members will be taking away the maximum amount of information from the speech. Figure 11.3 allows us to look at the process that we might go through when selecting and narrowing our topic choice for public speaking. Perhaps at the top, you see that you want to do something related to worldwide poverty. Maybe you've experienced poverty because you had to go through living in a home where there was less resources as a child, or maybe you know a lot about poverty because of the people who live in your community that are constantly struggling with that. So you could start with the general topic of poverty, and then you could narrow it down even more to poverty in the Western Hemisphere, because that is something that relates to you more because you are a student in a class that's in the United States. So then you could narrow it even to poverty in the US or America, or poverty in the state in which you live. You could look at poverty as a general topic as it connects to the homeless. The homeless crisis is at an all-time high in states all across the country. So we know that this is an ever increasing issue. So we can look at the homeless problem, and then we can tailor it more to the state in which we live, because that's something obviously that will allow us to have more credibility because it's taking place where we live. We also have access to better resources and research if we're living in the state where we're trying to develop this topic around. We can also look at the impoverished in our city as a more specific way to hone in. And then finally, we might decide that we really want to work on the children and how poverty affects children. And so then we are able to narrow the topic down to the impoverished, homeless children in our public schools. Narrowing a topic is extremely important in terms of being able to develop effective claims. If you don't do the research and narrow your topic down, you run the risk of giving a speech that is so general that it doesn't really have a lot of value and people cannot really relate to it. Remember, you are considered to be the expert on the topic with which you are speaking. So what that means is it is definitely on you to do effective research at the beginning of the designing phase so that you can choose a topic that's relevant and important. You can choose a topic that your audience can relate to and that you can relate to, and you can develop the research necessary in order to lay out your main claims and support them with effective supporting evidence. To conclude, this chapter has looked at the importance of conducting a self-analysis when we are designing and choosing a topic. We want to analyze our audience so that we can make sure that we talk to people in terms of where they are at, in terms of awareness, education, and beliefs. And this way, we will be more effective in our public speech. We also want to make sure that we tailor our speech so that it's appropriate for the specific occasion. The type of speech that you deliver in front of a classroom would vary significantly when you compare that to the type of short speech you might give at a business meeting. So we always want to be conscious of the context so that we can tailor our speech appropriately. We also want to determine if our topic is supported by our interests. So do we find the topic interesting? Our audience interests, or does the audience find this topic interesting? And make sure that our topic is relevant to the demands of the occasion. So is this the kind of topic that is appropriate given the speech environment? Finally, we want to narrow and clarify our topic, and we can do this by developing a detailed outline that should have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. You have examples of this on your course website, so you can go and look at that for specific examples of how to develop an effective outline. Generally speaking, when you deliver your speech, you want to tell your audience what you're going to tell them. During the speech body, you want to tell them your main points. And then at the end of the speech, you want to tell them what you told them. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of not reading note cards, the PowerPoint slides, or a paper during your speech. This course is dedicated to learning how to speak extemporaneously. And what this means is that you can develop a speech and deliver a speech that you have memorized by only using keywords to jog your memory. If you get in front of an audience and you start to read your speech, you have demonstrated to your audience that you did not do the research and the preparation required to really be an expert or a credible source on the topic. Also, if you do read your speech, your audience will start to disengage and you will lose them, which will ultimately decrease the effectiveness of your speech. Thank you for your attention and time in this chapter. I hope that it's been useful, and I strongly encourage you all to integrate these principles very closely in developing and delivering the speeches in this class. Thanks again for your time, and I'll talk to you all in the next chapter.